So good afternoon, everybody, and yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here. I wasn't thinking 3 weeks ago that I would be going to GCAGS. I'm here now, and it's an opportunity, I think, for me just to reconnect with this group, and also hopefully a little bit of an opportunity today to bridge a couple of topics that I know you're dealing with during this convention, which is both unconventionals, tight oil, and also the Deepwater in the Gulf of Mexico. And what I'd like to do really today is talk about both the Gulf and onshore Texas tight oil, and compare and contrast these, and share some learnings, particularly as they relate to the E&P paradigms, and as well as the business models, but be able to focus on a little bit of the geology too, to see why we have the E&P models that we do. So, the first point is when you stand back and look at Texas tight oil and Gulf of Mexico, the realization is very clear that it's fundamentally important. It has been and it will be. And there's Henry was talking about this morning. Lots of potential for growth in the Gulf, and clearly Permian Basin and the Eagle Ford have that potential as well, and more. These E&P models, the business models that we're looking at for the Deepwater and the Unconventionals are dramatically different. And they're dramatically different because the rocks are dramatically different. And I want to touch on that. And as well as the operating environments. But, we're seeing different approaches because they need different approaches. However, given where we're at in our learning and we've evolved, we're seeing some convergence, and that convergence really is driven by a desire from the industry to focus on value and realize value. And things have changed, oil prices have changed, and I think we're in a great point of time where we can take advantage of that to realize value for the future. One point, and the last point I really want to stress is, we're here at a convention. I'm sure the folks that are working on unconventionals tight oil are going to the unconventional tight oil sessions. The folks that like Deepwater are going to the Deepwater sessions. And I worry a little bit about divergence and capability, particularly for geoscientists. And I think we need to make a conscious effort to try to come back together at times, at least, so where we can share some of the lateral learnings, because there's a lot of learnings to be shared. We're seeing great things happening, for example, analytics and unconventional tight oil. Seeing wonderful things happening with seismic in Deepwater, offshore in general. And I think we need to make a conscious effort to try to kind of bring these camps together so we can learn from each other. So the outline of this talk, I want to give a brief introduction to really set the stage. We'll then talk about the importance and go through why it's important. We'll make a comparison. I've got some slides here. We're just really focused on the reservoir, but also on the business models and how we can compare those. Talk a little bit about the challenges that both tight oil and Texas and the Deepwater Gulf are facing, and then talk about some of how those challenges are being overcome and what's facing us in the future. So first, though, and this is really my acknowledgement slide. So as Deborah mentioned, I'm at the Bureau of Economic Geology, and I want to acknowledge my colleagues here because some of the materials that I'm going to be showing are materials that they have produced through their research there. Just a little bit of pitch, so Bureau of Economic Geology, we're the oldest research institute at UT. We've been around since 1909. We are also act as the State Geological Survey for Texas, but primarily we're a soft money research institute, and we do a lot of work with industry. We do a lot of work with both federal and state government, as well as foundations. And we work all over the world on various problems. And the focus for us is really to try to bring together these various pieces of research that are addressing problems in energy, environment, and economics. Because as we all know, these days you have to have an integrated, holistic approach to address the big problems, which are in each of those circles. Okay, so let's set the stage. And, you know, I was working on this talk, and it's kind of building on a couple of talks I gave last year, one on tight oil and another on deep water. Just reflect on the price history, and particularly how that has driven behaviors in terms of what's gone on in the E&P industry. So we've had this long period of growth, ramp up in price, then there was a collapse, and now we're in our new reality. And I think what's important about this is not so much that, you know, prices have changed and, you know, we've adapted, but that there has been a change in behaviors that have gone along with it. So when you look at this kind of in the sense of evolution, you know, think about some sort of environmental stress that's been put on the industry in general. You know, we were in very much growth mode for 15 years. Less focus on costs, expansion, you know, ability to get funding, making big investments, and we had, I think, greater tolerance for risk. Then, after the price correction, collapse, fall, whatever you want to call it, you know, we were cash flow driven, and there was hyper focus on costs. You know, element of hunkering down. And now, after basically 5 years, we're adapting. And hopefully we're becoming leaner and meaner. And, you know, and we are seeing, I think, across the companies that, you know, interact with, continued focus on costs. And also, importantly, and this is really important, a disciplined pursuit of growth opportunities. So, you know, you can argue that there's been a significant change in behaviors on the bad side, but I'd argue there's a silver lining to the cloud here. And this is a silver lining. So if you actually look at Gulf of Mexico deep water, get the pointer, you look at Eagle Ford, you look at Permian Basin, and the silver up at the top is the Austin Chalk. All of these are at basically historical highs, with maybe the exception of the Eagle Ford. And, you know, we're seeing this continued growth in both the deep water as well as the tight oil plays. So let's talk a little bit about the importance. So, okay, first of all, just, you know, historically, and these plays represent, just looking at this, you know, 16 billion barrels or more, 17 billion barrels of oil that's actually been produced. And that's just the tight oil component from the Midland Basin, by the way. So it is huge. It's absolutely enormous in the contributions so far. As I touched on, you know, we're seeing growth. Of course, U.S. production is the highest ever. And why? Well, 50% of why is because of the Texas tight oil plays and the Gulf of Mexico. And if you look at this, it's of 2018 figures, it was about 5.5 million, it's about 6.3 million. This is only the Texas component of the Permian Basin on this pie chart. And it's you know, enormous, and we're seeing a growth in all of the elements of these plays. So here's a comparison. These are built on EIA data, and over the last 3 years, we're seeing each of these basins and plays grow. And of course, the tight oil plays with the increased activity are growing at a very, very rapid pace. But importantly, the Gulf of Mexico Deepwater is growing as well. So, and as I mentioned, we're at the historical production levels. What I find pretty fascinating about this is where the Gulf of Mexico has been over the last 20 or 30 years in terms of kind of maintaining this gap and filling the gap in production for the U.S. And of course, now with Permian Basin and other tight oil plays, we're seeing the exceptional growth. But we shouldn't be forgetting the Gulf of Mexico. So if we put this in context, basically globally, what we're looking at from Texas tight oil and the Gulf is about 6% of global production. Doesn't sound like much, but it's a lot. And as I mentioned, we're over 50% of the U.S. production. So now let's talk about some of the E&P models and why are they different. And it really comes down to the rocks, as well as the environment, the operating environment. And here's just a comparison to Deepwater and Unconventionals. So, one of the big drivers in terms of which players are interested in Gulf versus which players that aren't actually comes down to their ability either within their portfolio or within their hearts and minds to accept risk. Because I had a chat with Marlon Downey just a week before he passed away. And, he said, kid, and he called people kid, I've been drilling wells now, and this was with Matador over the last 4 years, and we've drilled some 50 wells or something like that. And, I haven't drilled dry hole. And you can't say that if you're operating in the Gulf of Mexico. So if you can accept risk and you have the capability, then Deepwater Gulf of Mexico can fit your portfolio. But for some companies, that's not something we want to deal with. The environments, one is manageable. And I say that with some caveats and quotes. The other is extreme. And it's extreme in terms of water depth, extreme in terms of pressures, you name it. Proximity to coastline, and that creates issues, and it also creates costs. Henry was touching on this, and I think some other speakers, the drivers for the Gulf with these big developments is that you have the potential for high initial, high ultimate reservoirs. And, let's be frank with ourselves. When you're dealing with these mudrock plays, you're talking about low, and it'll be lower initial, ultimate type of reservoirs. So it's different type of rock, different operating conditions. And in the Gulf, it's long cycle times, at least for hub developments. We're talking about many years, and onshore it's very short. So just capturing some of that within metrics. So, what I find kind of fascinating right now, if you look at entry costs in terms of lease sales or acquisitions, it used to be the Gulf of Mexico was perceived as being an expensive place to play for lease sales. Well, it doesn't compare with what you're looking at least for the Permian Basin. What is still expensive, even with the 50% cost reductions or so over the last 4 or 5 years in the Gulf, are the wells. Drilling completions, you're talking a couple of $1 million compared to $12 million or so for a well in this case, the Permian Basin. As I mentioned, ultimates in the Deepwater are significant, and this is sort of an indicative range, 10 to 35 million barrels per well. And some wells and some of the other offshore plays that are at least touted in company reports, they're expecting 50 million barrels per well, which is just remarkable, really. And the range, and of course, asking how much you're going to get out of a well is like asking the length of a piece of string, because it depends on the well, of course. But when you're talking about the onshore Permian Basin, these are modest, but of course important EURs on the order of 500,000 barrels to over 1 million barrels or so. Cycle times, Gulf, it's years, Permian or Eagle Ford, it's months, and that's a big attractor. It's a big attractor, in particular if you're driven by cash flow. And if you look at the break-even prices, they're comparable. Of course, it depends. Some projects will be higher in both areas, and some projects may never get off the ground because they're just too costly. And one of the speakers this morning talked about the Paleogene, some of the Wilcox, and that struggles. It struggles from a reservoir perspective. So when you look at the E&P models for deep water and compare these, the key drivers for the deep water, it's all about trying to understand the risks and reduce the uncertainty before you make significant investments. And basically, you're balancing your costs, both to get into the acreage as well as to make that discovery and then appraise that discovery before you're looking at the several $1 billion of investment with a deep water project. So it's really focused on trying to reduce that uncertainty and understand that risk up front. For the tight oil realm, it's a different model. Here, absolutely, it's about reduction of uncertainty, but it's a lot of what's driving this is optimization of the development. And here you learn with the bit. So there's a need to be able to drill, develop, produce. Pilots are important. Optimize, collect more data, digest that data, do again, and really understand, which type of well you need, which bench you want to be on, and get that down so that you can make the most of it. So these are different, and they have different times and different capabilities. Just some comparisons. I'm not going to belabor that, but the one to really draw your attention on is when you look at permeabilities here. And I'm going to show you some examples of this, but we're talking about 8 orders of magnitude difference. And I'd ask you all to think about any other business or industry out there that is being successful in making the same product within an 8 order of magnitude difference in spread. I can't think of it. So this is an impressive accomplishment, folks. So, let's look at the examples. Permian Basin, you guys probably know this much better than I do, but, we've got the Delaware with Midland. Multiple zones, both in the Wolfcamp as well as the Bone Springs and Avalon and the Delaware. We've got the Sprayberry and the Wolfcamp in the Midland. So, lots of potential. And, if you look at a log, and here's a well out of the Midland Basin, and just in terms of the amount of potential resource based on TOC in this case, and as well as, I'm not sure the porosity, but that distribution, it's enormous. I mean, these are very thick successions of oil-bearing rock. You go to the Eagle Ford, okay, it's a little bit thinner, but it's over a very large area. The focus, of course, has been lower Eagle Ford. And I just want to pause here for a second because as I put this slide in, the co-author here, Steve Ruppel, I just want to make people aware. Steve, unfortunately, passed away earlier this week. He was a good friend and a good colleague. And so we're missing him and still trying to deal with that loss. But he was behind much of the work that we've been doing in the Midlands. So, that's just an example of Eagle Ford. And then we go to the Gulf of Mexico. So the Gulf of Mexico basically is driven right now by 3 plays. Those plays are Miocene, the Paleogene, and the Northland. And it's had some success in all 3 of the plays here recently, and I'll touch on some of those successes. But the issue with the Gulf of Mexico, of course, is complexity, and that you don't have continuous distribution of resource. So you have to be able to find those traps with the right charge in reservoir. But you can have some great reservoirs. We're talking hundreds, also 1,000 plus thickness in some cases of feet. And in all 3 plays, Miocene, Wilcox, Paleogene, and Northland. So if you can find it and you find the right sand dump, then these can be very prolific. So scale matters. And I want to come back to this whole point about how different these rocks are. So this is a good, but it's not an exceptional reservoir. It's a thin section, by the way, for those who don't look at thin sections. Blue is porosity. These are quartz grains mainly. And that's diameter of a human hair that's shown there. And this rock has permeability about 100 millidarsons. It's okay. So let's think about this in comparison to both the size of the pores as well as the permeability for unconventional. So there's that hair. Here is porosity developed in kerogen or bitumen within unconventional. And let's just take this down to scale. So, these are fundamentally different rocks. Yes, these mud rocks have porosity, but it's in tiny, tiny, tiny little holes. And you got to get the oil out of those tiny, tiny holes. So it used to be, and this would have been my paradigm, it probably still is to some degree. I would have said, okay, well, if we're not at about 20% porosity, 100 millidarcies in the Deepwater Gulf, then we're talking either about bad or really ugly reservoirs. And that, I think, still holds. But now, if you look at the range, so we've got a cross plot here, porosity versus permeability, and I've just put on the good reservoir. Here's what I noted as bad, and here's the ugly. And then here's a comparison with SEM from Eagle Ford. And, we're, as I mentioned, we're looking at this 8 order of magnitude difference in terms of permeability. So what does that mean? Well, it means that I'm an old guy with old thinking, and it's important to have this new paradigm. And that new paradigm is that, there's good at both ends of the spectrum. And yes, you may need to frack the hell out of these rocks to get oil out of them, and you do, but you can. And you can make a business out of it. Okay, so let's talk about a few of the challenges that we're facing here. And I want to step back. I'm mainly talking about technical points, but certainly in my career and also in my involvement with the Bureau, many of the issues that actually are facing the industry and society are non-technical issues. So, we need to be thinking, you in industry, us in the research community, as to how we manage holistically all the various clouds of challenges in an effective way. Because it's just not about the technical. It's just not about the environmental. It's not about the economic. It's put these together so that you actually can make it a viable business that is sustainable and that is acceptable by the communities or the country that you're operating in. So the technical issues, though, I'm going to focus on. And in particular, we've kind of alluded to it. It's the reservoir quality and the performance for shales, and as well as low recovery factors. The other challenges, environmental, these are ones that are extremely topical right now. Seismicity in particular, but also water management. And this is also very topical if you're active in these plays. How can we approach a life cycle type of development here in managing change in the prices, the basis, infrastructure, all that. So let's look at production declines. So this is some data analysis that was done a few years ago, where we basically just had about 5 years worth of production out of the Eagle Ford wells. And it compiled data from 1,500 wells. And then looked at declines. So as a reminder on these reservoirs, we're looking at declines of about 75% in that first year. Second year down to about 85% of what you started with. So it's an uphill battle, folks. And it means that if you want to sustain production, you have to keep drilling or try to increase the IPs or do something. If you compare this, and now I'm comparing, these are all the existing fields and startups that have been reported in terms of decline, so that's just normalized to 1. And that's the same curve that you just saw for the Eagle Ford. So looking at Gulf of Mexico, so this is everything, old fields, young fields, projections versus the Eagle Ford data. And this is a dramatic difference in terms of how these reservoirs will produce and will perform. So again, drives different approaches and requirements for capabilities to unlock this. The other challenge related to that is when you look at the resource that's out there, and now here backed off a little bit further, so we're looking at the big bubbles here are in-place numbers, or in-place bubbles across the gas plays and the oil plays. We're still conducting work in the Permian Basin on both the in-place and recoverable, but I'm showing you what we've come up with so far for the in-place. So this is over 1 trillion barrels of movable oil that's sitting in the Midland and Delaware Basin. So the resource is not the issue. It's how much you're going to be able to get out, economically in particular. And the recovery factors to date have been low. And let me give you a couple of examples here from the Eagle Ford. So this is some work was done a few years ago looking at in-place, and that in-place is based on basically volume per square mile. So just the distribution, hydrocarbons over the Eagle Ford trend. And then it's a little hard to see, but basically these are the recovery factors for the oil part of the play and then getting into the gas condensate play. So for the oil part of the play, basically you have a range of about 2% to 16%. The mode that we're running with is less than 10%. And of course, this is a function of the reservoir quality, the initial reservoir pressures, as well as the fluid quality, GOR and viscosity. So, the recovery factors are low. I don't think that's news to anybody. But it does mean that we've got a big potential for future growth. So let's move on to the deep water. Deep water, different beast. Same clouds, right? It's, how can we make a business and manage issues with the environment, issues with the community that we're operating in. And some of the issues, of course, on the environmental side is well control, which we know acutely well from the Macondo accident. Economic, the problem here is this big upfront base investment that's required, and of course, if you're operating in the remoteness of where you're producing from in the Gulf. And then on the technical side, what is very critical, and I want to go into this in a little bit more detail, is just the importance of the seismic. And being able to image, acquire, interpret the seismic data, and understand what that reservoir is about, what the field is about, and then be able to make some projections on where to drill and how to drill. So, if I stand back and look at the E&P model, and I've had many arguments with the folks in development and production on this, but I tell you, if you can't explore well, you're not going to make a go of it in the Gulf. You're not going to make a go of it in Deepwater. And the reality is, and these are some data from McKinsey that compiled. I think they used some WoodMac data as well. Basically, across those three plays, you're looking at a range and success percentages about 20 to 45%. So 20s Wilcox, 45% would be Mice and others. And they had some data for the Mexico side of the Gulf, and that's on the order of 55%, but with much fewer wells. And I do wonder, when I was looking at these numbers, whether that 55% is actually reflective of commercial discoveries or not, and I just don't know. This is the problem in the Gulf of Mexico, or the opportunity. It's incredibly complex. Here's a seismic line across the western Gulf, so you can see Perdido area here. There's a Baja High, if you know that part of the Gulf, Sigsbee Canopy, and looking at what's called the Salina del Bravo area. And it's extremely complex. It's hard to put together the reservoir stories, the charge stories, and also understand how the charge would be retained in some of these structures, which is one of the risks. And it's difficult to image and also interpret. Fundamentally, it's hard stuff and it's challenging. So let's talk about overcoming some of these challenges for the future. So the potential is enormous. You saw the in-place oil bubbles in the previous plot. Here are some numbers compiled from both the USGS as well as, I think those were IHS numbers for the Gulf. So this is in 1 billion barrels, and you can see that those are the data taken straight from the USGS assessment. Based on our work at the Bureau, we would look at the Permian Basin as being low, and the Eagle Ford low on the order of about a factor of 1.5 to 2. So, again, it's enormous. So call the Permian Basin 100 billion barrels just of oil, not oil equivalent. Probably too much gas. And the numbers for the U.S. and Mexico, I can't vouch for those that they're coming from IHS, but probably reasonable. These are BOE numbers. Given my understanding of both the U.S. and Mexican Gulf, I would say that's mainly oil. So a lot of potential. So how do we realize that? Well, we've got to maximize the recovery. And, if you think about life cycle type of development, and this is the current modus operandi, you're not just thinking about primary. You're thinking about primary, you're thinking about secondary with water flood, gas injection, and you're also thinking about EOR. You're not proceeding with a major development without giving thought to how you're going to get every last drop out economically. We're kind of in a learning stage here with the unconventionals. So, a lot of this was driven land grab, get out there, get the production, get what you can out of these reservoirs. But I think there's this realization that yes, we can realize more value. Yes, we can get more out of the reservoir that we're developing. And so, some of the modes for EOR, particularly huff and puff with cyclic gas injection, are important. The caveat here is, and I'll show you a slide just a second, that these reservoirs vary. So what may work well in a part of the Eagle Ford Play may not work well in another part of the Eagle Ford Play. And trying to take a model that, let's say, was developed in the Bakken and apply it to the Permian Basin may not be so appropriate. So it's going to take some learning as we go with this. I did want to say a couple of things about primary production. And what's fundamental, and particularly now, is to take a system view approach to these unconventional plays, where you're integrating the geology, the modeling, particularly the analytics and history matching from well performance, so that you can get at optimization of that primary production. Because you kind of need to know that before you're getting into EOR. I mentioned huff and puff. Here's a list. I just got this from guys at JPT, and here's some big projects that are moving along. So it's definitely being worked. The other trend that we're seeing, and is coming back to scale, is we're seeing consolidation. This happens to be an example from ExxonMobil in southeastern New Mexico. Basically, they've consolidated their acreage position. They're approaching the development of this acreage in a manufacturing mode. Why? Because you can optimize development, you can reduce costs, and you can integrate all the various pieces that are related, propane, water, etc., in such a way that you can manage and control how that area is going to be developed. So the integration and scale make a big difference. In the Gulf, coming back to the point about seismic, it's trying to maximize the discovery and as well as the recovery here. So it's everything related to seismic. It's the acquisitions, processing, imaging, inversion, interpretation. And here are a couple of, whoops, back up. There we go. A couple of examples, both from Thunder Horse. This is Thunder Horse South, where they've done inversion of the BP, of ocean bottom node data, and being able to basically define a reservoir distribution on that basis. And here's an example on the salt on Thunder Horse with improved imaging using a combination of wide azimuth and RTM processing. So it makes a big difference. And I think somebody was mentioning about new projects. Well, there are a number of new projects. So tiebacks have been gone through FID. We've seen some recent discoveries there. A couple plays, both the Paleogene and Jurassic. We've seen development expansions and significant volume additions. So it's growing. And I'm just going to put in a plug. I'm in the research community now, so research is important, folks, particularly for complex areas like the Gulf of Mexico. And here is an example, the extension of that seismic line you saw. And the great thing, we've got our group, Applied Geoscience Laboratory, read that as Salt Tectonics, run by Mike Hudick. And there's a guy, Tim Dooley, who does these models. To be able to unravel the interpretation of this complex structuration that we're seeing in the Gulf of Mexico requires having some meaningful analogs. And this is one way to get at those analogs. And the point here is that, and I'm sure many of you do this as well, you can make great visualizations, you can make things that look lovely, but they're models. So unless you can actually have the best data and the best interpretation in there, you have to look at these models as just a visualization. So it's important that you continuously try to improve them. So let's talk about the future, and then I'll wrap up. So this is the BP projection. You may have already seen this this morning. Here's ExxonMobil's, that's 120 million barrels of oil per day. That's 120 down to about 80. And there's been a lot in the press about peak demand. I thought what the economists at BP said really nails it right on the head. It doesn't really matter if there's peak demand or not. The world's still going to need some oil. And let's call it plus 20% or minus 20% next 20 years, 2040. I'll lay a bet with anybody in this room. I may still be alive in 2040, maybe. But I'll bet you a nice bottle of wine that we come someplace in that range. I think it's reasonable. And if I'm wrong, well, I may not be alive anyway, so. So anyway, we need what's going on in the Gulf and the Texas tight oil plays. If you ask me, and it's a personal opinion here, the biggest risk that we're facing is underinvestment. And that's underinvestment driven by lack of investment dollars that are available. Capability, I really worry about capability, pulling in younger people in particular to be able to come into the industry and work these problems. I worry about not investing in technology up front and research up front. And I also worry about public sentiment. And all these things can kind of influence the mood. So I think it's important that we take some pride in what we do and go out there and sell what we do. So, and just a point on that last piece, part of the reason that we are seeing this production curve, if you ask me, is because we had this kind of price history. It's almost just right out of phase, right? And I want to ask you all this question. In current normal, reality, whatever you want to call it, are we going to be able to invest enough? Do we have the belief, that sentiment that's going to drive us being able to match future demand? The other point is we've got lots of opportunities to share. There's excellence, but some of that excellence is siloed, right? It's in the unconventional camp or it's in the deep water camp. What I've seen done with well analytics and Eagle Ford or Permian Basin play, it's amazing. I don't think it's been applied all that well in some of the deep water plays. And the same with some of the seismic. Seismic has been kind of forgotten. Some companies use it, many don't. We can make the most of it. And importantly too, is things like full cycle project planning. This is the bread and butter, the deep water. Big companies can do it onshore. It would be, I think, a great thing if the smaller companies start to take that long-term view about their acreage. So let me just finish up where I started. So, Texas tight oil and the Gulf, these are important, folks. They are different. And the E&P models, approaches are different because these are different reservoirs, largely. We're seeing some evolution, some trends here that I think are really optimistically encouraging with this focus on value. And I just make this pitch that it's time that we take a deliberate action to start to share a little bit more than what we've been doing. So with that, I'll stop and open up for any questions or comments. On the basis of what I see in both areas, both Texas or unconventional and the Gulf, that we're being very selective about the growth projects that we're getting involved in. But they're still occurring. So You know, like I mentioned, the Exxon project in southeastern New Mexico, I think they're investing, but they're investing wisely. And I think, you know, there's still a lot of, you know, maybe it's because it's matured in the Permian Basin, for example, that, you know, there's just not that many opportunities to go out and get new acreage without paying a huge amount of money. So people who are taking some time to see how they can get more value of the acreage they have.
I mean, that's the real question to me, is adaptation necessarily translate into getting into the opportunities, or are we still stuck in, as you say, underinvestment?
Yeah, I had a couple slides to broaden this further and talk about unconventional plays globally. And I'm going to answer your question or comment that way, Henry. You know, I think we're at a point where we're going to need to see industry actually take some risk in the tidal plays overseas to be able to sustain the potential production in the future. Because I don't think it's going to be doable just from what we got.